I never imagined that the son I carried in my arms, the boy I taught to ride a bike and whispered bedtime stories to, would one day look at me like I was nothing more than an obstacle standing between him and $40 million. My name is Margaret Thompson, and for 57 years I believed family was the one thing in this world that could never truly break. We lived in the same quiet coastal town where I grew up. My late husband, Robert, passed 5 years ago after a long illness, leaving me with our modest house and a heart that still ached every time I walked past his empty chair. Our only child, David, was 30 then. He had married his high school sweetheart, Lisa, 8 years earlier. She wasn't the glamorous type the world celebrates these days, but she was the kind of woman who stayed up all night when David lost his job, who worked 2 shifts so he could chase his dreams, who loved him even when the money ran out. I adored her, like the daughter I never had. Life wasn't easy, but we had each other. David worked construction, Lisa waitressed, and I helped with groceries when I could. We laughed around my kitchen table on Sundays. I thought that was enough. Then came the phone call that changed everything. It was a rainy Tuesday morning. My lawyer's voice sounded far away, like he was reading from someone else's life. "Margaret, your father-in-law's estate has been settled. David is the sole beneficiary, $40 million in trust." 40 million. The number didn't even feel real. Robert's father had always been distant, a wealthy man who never approved of our simple life, but apparently blood was blood to him in the end. The will named me trustee until David turned 35, or proved he could manage the funds responsibly. I was to guide him, protect him, the way I always had. When I told David and Lisa, the 3 of us stood in my living room in stunned silence. Lisa's eyes filled with happy tears. David hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. "Mom, this is for all of us," he said, voice cracking. "We're finally free." For the first few weeks, it felt like a dream. David bought a beautiful house overlooking the ocean. He paid off every debt we ever had. He even surprised Lisa with a new car. I watched them dance in the kitchen like teenagers again and thought, maybe money really can heal old wounds. But money doesn't change people. It only reveals who they truly are. I started noticing small things. David stopped answering Lisa's calls when he was out meeting investors. He began making comments about how she didn't fit the new lifestyle. One evening I drove over with homemade lasagna, Lisa's favorite, found her sitting on the front steps in the dark, suitcase beside her. Her eyes were swollen. He said, "I embarrass him now," she whispered, "that the world he's entering doesn't have room for someone like me." My heart shattered right there on the driveway. I brought her home that night, made her tea, held her while she cried. David didn't even call to check on her. Still, I told myself it was a rough patch. Rich people get new friends, new pressures. He'd come to his senses. Then came the night that planted the first seed of real fear. I was at the new house returning some paperwork the lawyers had sent. David was in his study on the phone, door cracked open. I didn't mean to eavesdrop, but his voice carried cold, calculated, nothing like the boy I raised. "She's getting too involved. The trust gives her too much control. If I can have her declared incompetent, get her committed for her own safety, the court will transfer everything to me. I've already spoken to Dr. Harlan. He owes me favors." My blood turned to ice. He was talking about me, his own mother. I stood frozen in the hallway, heart hammering so loudly I was sure he could hear it. When he finally hung up, I slipped out the back door before he noticed me. Driving home, tears blurred the road. The boy who once drew me crayon pictures was now planning to lock me away, so he could steal what was never truly his to begin with. That was the moment everything changed. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table with the trust documents spread out and whispered to the empty room, "What have you become, David?" But what I didn't know that night was how far he was willing to go. The next weeks became a nightmare I still can't fully wake from. David stopped visiting. He changed his number, blocked mine. When I drove to the big house, the gates were locked, and a security guard I didn't recognize told me I was no longer welcome. Lisa stayed with me, sleeping in the guest room that used to be David's old bedroom. Every night she'd whisper, "I don't understand how he could throw us both away." I tried calling him through lawyers. His attorney sent a letter claiming I was emotionally unstable and interfering with David's rightful inheritance. They wanted me to sign papers giving up my role as trustee. I refused. Then the rumors started. Friends from church called me in hushed voices. "Margaret, people are saying you've been forgetting things, talking to yourself, that David is worried about your safety." My own neighbors began looking at me with pity. Someone I still don't know who slipped a business card for a psychiatric facility under my windshield wiper. My heart broke into pieces I didn't know could break further. This was my son, the same child I held when he had nightmares, the teenager I taught to drive, the man I stood beside at his wedding. Now he was painting me as crazy, so the world would hand him everything. I cried until there were no tears left. Then anger replaced the tears. Not the loud, screaming kind, just a quiet, burning resolve. I started keeping a journal. Every late-night call, every strange visitor asking how I was feeling lately, every document that appeared in my mailbox, with wording that sounded like it came from a doctor I'd never met. I saved every single one. Lisa was my rock. She'd sit with me at the kitchen table late into the night, holding my hand. "We're not going down without a fight, Mom," she'd say softly. Her strength surprised even me. The woman David had discarded was rising while he was sinking. One afternoon, a private investigator I quietly hired showed me the first real proof. David had been meeting with a doctor, Dr. Harlan, who had never once examined me. They'd written a preliminary report suggesting I suffered from early-onset dementia and delusional paranoia. David had already transferred several $1,000,000 into accounts only he could access, claiming it was for my care. I sat in the investigator's office and felt something inside me shift from shattered to steel. The pain was still there, raw and bleeding, but beneath it grew a mother's fierce protectiveness, not just for myself, but for the daughter-in-law he had betrayed and for the memory of the decent man I once raised. I stopped crying in public. I started answering every concerned phone call with calm dignity. "I'm perfectly fine, thank you. Please tell David I love him, and I'm praying for him." I let them think I was weak while I quietly built my case. David grew bolder. He filed a petition with the court asking for an emergency guardianship hearing. The date was set for 6 weeks away. In the papers he claimed I was a danger to myself, and that only he could manage my affairs. And the $40 million, the night I read those documents, I stood at my bedroom window looking out at the dark ocean and whispered, "You may have the money, David, but you will never have my soul." That was the night I truly stopped being the broken mother and became the woman who would fight back. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and nervous sweat. I walked in wearing the simple navy dress I'd worn to Robert's funeral, the one that still carried a whisper of his cologne if I closed my eyes. Lisa sat right behind me, holding my hand under the table. David sat across the aisle, in an expensive suit, eyes cold, refusing to meet my gaze. My lawyer presented everything we had gathered, bank records showing unauthorized transfers, the forged medical reports, recordings from the private investigator of David promising the doctor a generous consulting fee if things went his way. When the judge asked if I had anything to add, I stood slowly. "Your Honor, I don't want revenge. I want my son to remember who he was before the money changed him. But I will not let him destroy the only family I have left." I played the recording of David on the phone, the one I had secretly captured that night in the hallway. His voice filled the silent courtroom. "If I can have her declared incompetent, get her committed." The judge's face hardened. David's lawyer tried to object, But it was too late. The damage was done. In the weeks that followed, the court removed David as beneficiary of the trust. The $40 million would remain under my careful management, with a generous portion set aside for Lisa as compensation for the emotional destruction he had caused. David was ordered to pay her monthly support and was barred from contacting either of us without permission. The house he bought with the inheritance money was placed in a trust for Lisa's future. The last time I saw my son was outside the courthouse. He stood alone on the steps, the expensive suit suddenly looking too big for him. For 1 second, our eyes met. I saw the little boy who used to run to me when he scraped his knee. I saw the man who had tried to bury me alive. I didn't speak. I simply turned, took Lisa's arm, and walked away. Months later, I heard he had moved to another state. The new friends disappeared once the money stopped flowing. Last I knew, he was working construction, again the same job he had before the inheritance. Sometimes I wonder if he lies awake at night remembering the mother, who loved him more than $40 million ever could. Lisa and I still live in my little house by the sea. We turned the spare room into a sunlit studio, where she paints something she always dreamed of doing. On Sundays we still set 3 places at the table out of habit, but the third chair no longer feels empty. It feels peaceful. I sit on the porch most evenings, watching the waves, and whisper the same words I've come to live by. Blood makes us related, but love makes us family. Greed can twist even the purest heart, but truth and kindness always find their way home. Never let money tell you who you are. Let the way you treat the people who loved you when you had nothing define the person you become. My heart is no longer shattered. It is stronger, wiser, and finally at peace. And that, my dear friends, is the greatest revenge of all.